Eckhart Tolle describes it in a really lovely way. You know that feeling of, I'm sure you'll all recognize this, you know that sort of edge before you let yourself feel something. And you know that it's something that you don't want to let yourself feel, but you don't really know the full extent of that. You just know that, oh, I don't want to go there. And we can feel that resistance piece, yeah. And that piece, Eckhart Tolle defines that as an ego. That ego place of, I'm okay in this, I'm not okay in that. That to let myself fall into this feeling, whether it's sadness or fear or whatever it is, that on an ego level that can feel like I have failed. An ego will judge us hugely in that. And that kind of ego position keeps us in the resistance. That keeps us in that, no, I won't let myself feel it. No, I won't let myself change my mind. I won't let myself do anything differently. I'm going to stay in this place. And that's exhausting. But when we're able to let ourselves really go with that, so it's really going with the flow of whatever that healing cycle is, there's a part of that that feels like a death. It feels like a death. But the core of it is that it's death of the ego. That ego part actually dies a little bit because it didn't get to win. And what we end up with, what we actually achieve from that, when we let ourselves really go fully into whatever we need to heal, the end of that is we actually don't feel any kind of death. We don't fear death whatsoever. Ego is the only part that interferes and makes things feel not okay. That's the main thing that keeps us on the edge of anything that's outside the edge of anything that's good for us. As soon as we make that breakthrough, and it's horrendous, the first time that we do that, oh my God, you'd rather donate all your organs than go through it. Yeah. It can feel horrendous because the surrender, it feels like we're surrendering to everything that is wrong for us, because that's how the ego operates. And it's not until we take that leap of faith with it, or until it becomes unbearable to stay on that side of it and we go through with it, that we realize, oh, this was so right for me. This was so what I needed. So I really liked how Eckhart Tolle described that, because I couldn't put it into words before then. And it just really made sense what he was describing about that kind of death feeling. Because I was starting to notice that I could remember it in myself and my own journey of this. And I can remember that point where I could feel I had so many things in me that I wanted to heal. And the only words that I could put in it was, I needed to fall apart. I didn't know what the nuts and bolts of that was. But just this feeling in me of, I'm sick of holding everything together. I'm sick of being strong for everybody else. I'm sick of just not having this kind of space. And I didn't know what falling apart really meant. But it was exactly that, what he's describing. It was letting that ego piece go, because the ego piece of me was, like I described with my colleague in work, of always saying yes, no matter what anybody asks you, you accommodate, you do whatever you can. And I was so stuck in that pattern. And it was making me terribly, terribly unwell. It meant that I never really got to look at anything that needed healing in me. It had to just wait. It was queuing up inside until that became unbearable. So that point of letting myself just fall apart, and it felt so risky. But it allowed me to step into that healing space of just feeling my stuff. And I genuinely took that time for however long it was. It was maybe a year or two that I was like, okay, this is just my time for me. And whatever amount of journaling and writing I need to do, or meditation, or therapy, or healing, or crying, I'm going to let myself do that. And I let myself do that falling apart piece. And there was definitely parts of it that felt like a death. There was definitely parts of it that felt like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to get to the other side of this. But once I was in the midst of it, you can't sort of swim backwards out of it. So it's already in motion. Yeah? And best I could do was I was literally hoping for the best and just keep on going. And then I began to recognize the cycle of the waves. that when I just kept going, it passed. It eventually got to a point where it felt calm and peaceful, and it passed. And I would feel this relief that I had given a healing to some part of me that had to wait for however long. And then a certain amount of time would pass, and I would feel another wave of something that had become ready for me to look at. And over time, gradually, my trust in that process grew and grew. I definitely didn't have trust in the process in early days. It was very frightening. It was just very kind of uncharted. I didn't know what was going to happen. The simplest way that I can maybe describe it is, if I ultimately follow what is true and right for me, ultimately the outcome will always be positive. Ultimately the outcome will be the correct one for me. Yeah? If I follow the ego part of it, at a certain point I will find myself in the same situation again, in the same way of feeling. I will find myself at exactly the same kind of, it can look like a crisis or the same way of feeling or whatever it is. And that's how I find out, oh, that didn't actually work. What I thought was the right thing to do at that time didn't actually work. And so I'm right back at this point again. Yeah. So sometimes that's how we find out which is ego, which is usually the fear side of things. Yeah, it will have that kind of quality to it. The other side will feel a lot more like surrender, or it can feel like courage, or that sort of thing. Ego will be resistance, fear, reluctance, pulling away, withdrawing, all of that kind of energy, holding back. That kind of energy. So you can see what my body is doing when I speak about ego in this. It's that surrender is, okay, I can move forward. You kind of described it very well, about that we don't always get to have everything on our terms. And ego will always ask for it in that sort of way. Ego will set everything up that it feels right and righteous in everything. So your ego will not rest until they move their goddamn cars and do things in your way. So the point of this, is how ego will attach and really dig its heels into, this is right and they're wrong. As soon as we have anything that's split in that good, bad, right, wrong, up, down, left, right sort of a way, we have a split. Ego will always try and split everything. And where we're bringing this today, where we started with this, it's actually brought us into the whole ego zone, and you notice how ego will bring conflict. Even just the speaking of ego brings conflict energy into the space. So this is how we get to know it. So we don't get into the conflict with it, because that's how we feed the ego. It loves that we get into a conflict with it. So when we just say to ego, this is what I'm going to do, we're not getting into the conflict area with it. Then we're not arguing with it whether it's right or it's wrong, or it's up or down, or good or bad. It's just no. And we give ourselves the other option, which is following what feels true and what feels good or best for us. It's usually the path that's most simple, least resistance. That's all. Path of least resistance is usually the right one. Or at the very least we find out how it maybe wasn't exactly the right path. But at least we took some step. Ego will not allow us to really take any step. It's strong enough at times to completely stop us in our tracks in terms of making progress. When we ask for something, and we know that I can live with the yes answer, but I don't want the no answer, then it's ego. When it's asking, do you want tea or coffee, and it makes no difference to me whether you have tea or whether you have coffee, that's kind of what we're talking about when we move out of that ego space. It doesn't matter to me however it is. I will ask, and then I will live what the answer is. So in that example that I gave you from my work, in the past, my ego would not allow me to say no. There was one desired answer, or there was one answer that fitted with ego, which was yes, do everything and be everything to all people at all times, at whatever expense to yourself. And when I checked that on Monday and really sat with it, yeah, I had to let that ego piece go, and I thought it took a whole day. It took a whole day where it said to me, "Well, no, Emer, you've said yes to this now." It took a whole day before I realized, no, I need to correct this now, and I gave myself that permission. So this is about letting ourselves get to know what ego looks like, sounds like, and feels like in it. And letting ourselves recognize and get to know what are the consequences when I follow my ego side of things, and what are my consequences when I don't. When I let myself follow my truth, what are the consequences of that? We'll soon start to get a pretty clear picture of which is which. Ego side will always lead to suffering in some way, shape, or form. Following my truth will always lead to peacefulness in some way, shape, or form. So if I am not at peace, I am not following my truth. Yeah. So it's as simple as that. So even if the road is rocky and bumpy and dark and cloudy and stormy, when I know that I'm following my truth, I can find a peace with that. It will just feel right for me. Like that point where I knew I needed to fall apart. The months after that, where I gave that permission, it was horrendous. Yeah, messy crying and just not knowing which way was back or forward. But I knew it was what I needed. So that part that felt like truth, and I could find it inside, it felt so still. When I stopped everything else and I would go inside, it would just feel so still, and I knew that it was there. I knew I could recognize that everything else was just noise, and I just needed to get closer and closer to this. I had no idea how to do that, but I just had a sense of this is where you need to go, or at least this is worth trying. And then we find out if it works or it doesn't.